thesis committee meetings, what to expect and how to prepare so that you can make the most of the time you've got all those experts there. So fun might be a bit of a strong word, but thesis committee meetings, these once or twice a year kind of like progress check-ins that you have with your thesis committee during grad school, these can be a really valuable resource where you have a group of world-renowned experts sitting in a room listening to you talk about your work and trying to help you get to the finish line. But they can also be scary if you don't know what to expect. But if you do and you prepare well ahead, then you're able to really make the most of these meetings. So let's talk about how you can do that.
So first off, what are these thesis committee meetings that I'm talking about? Basically, your thesis is going to be the topic that you're studying. This is going to be your research that you're going to do over the years of your PhD journey. You're going to have to come up with a research project, and then you're going to have to defend your proposal for what you want to do for your research. Now, you're going to have a thesis committee that's going to be the ones that are going to license whether or not they think that you're ready and they think that the project is like feasible and makes sense and all of these things. And you're going to have, this is sometimes called a part of a qualifying exam. Sometimes the qualifying exam is a separate thing, and then you have your thesis proposal defense. But one way or another, you're going to kind of have to defend what you want to research and why you're ready to actually go down that why your project makes sense and all of these things. And you're going to have this thesis committee that's going to be the ones that say whether or not you can then proceed with your thesis research. Now, this thesis committee is going to have 3 or 4 people who are kind of somehow they're related to the research that you're doing. You can have people from different backgrounds. So maybe you have like a structural biology person and a biochemistry person, and or they're working on different like things related to different aspects of your project. But you want to choose people who are going to have helpful insight and suggestions. And this is going to come into play when you're having these thesis committee meetings, which is like progress meetings that take place once or twice a year after you've gone through that qualifying exam. And so that qualifying exam, at this point, it's going to be more like a grilling, not like a grilling, but basically you really have to defend yourself, defend your work. When you get to these thesis committee meetings, here things are a little less stress, especially after your first one. They're a little less adversarial, more collegial, especially if you come in really prepared. If you come in prepared, these can actually be really, really helpful. Great discussions with expert scientists that you're able to get ideas from and suggestions and really kind of talk through ideas with. And so it could be really, really helpful, but you have to be well prepared going into it so that you don't just get flustered and so that you can have these fruitful discussions rather than just kind of feeling like a deer in the headlights or that sort of thing. And so these thesis committee meetings are going to be what we're going to be focusing on how to prepare for, so we can kind of take some of that stress away and really just focus on how they can be a tool for you to improve your research and to better make progress. And because one of their jobs too is to make sure that you're making progress. At this point, you've passed your qualifying exam, you passed your defense. They think, okay, well, you are ready to do this project. This project makes sense, and they've kind of invested in you. You can think of it. And so now their role is really to help you get to the finish line. And so rather than being grilling and this sort of thing, it can really be more beneficial to you. So just have that attitude going in, and it'll make things a lot less stressful. But you're still really going to want to prepare. And so we'll go over how you can prepare for this. And note too that things are always going to depend on who's on your committee. So as I mentioned, there's those typically like 3 or 4 people, and then there's also going to be your PI. So your principal investigator, the head of your lab, the person whose lab you're in. That person is typically not on the thesis in the qualifying exam or in your thesis proposal defense. They're not present in that one, but then they're present in all of your later meetings. And so your thesis committee then it grows to include that person. And then at the end, you often have an external examiner, because this thesis committee is also going to be the people who are going to give you that doctorate at the end. And that final thesis committee is going to also include someone from another institution, typically called an external examiner. And so that is basically their role throughout this journey. And this thesis committee meetings can be kind of scary, especially the first time. But hopefully once you get more confident and you start to realize that you really know a lot about your work and you're the best person to explain it, and you know the most about what you're doing than anyone else, as you grow confidence, these meetings can get actually really fun. I know that sounds weird, but they can really be helpful discussions. But there can be some rough points. So let's go through how you can prepare. First off, my suggested layout. So typically you're going to go in there and you're going to have some pre-prepared, some like a slideshow, a PowerPoint, and we'll go over some things about this later. But my suggested layout for how you go through your presentation is you start with the big picture, then go into your aims. So you typically have like specific aims. So you have like aim 1, aim 2, aim 3, and those have sub aims. And these are the aims that you basically, when you do your thesis proposal, you have to specify you set it out into different aims, and then which experiments you're doing for what aims and all this stuff. So then you want to tie in, when you're doing your presentation, you can actually put your aims up there on the slides so that remind them what your aims were. And then you want to remind them where you were last time you met. And so you want to show, okay, well, remind them, okay, so last time I was here and now I am here. So you want to show how you built upon where you were last time. And so show them directly like how you've made progress. And then you want to talk about what's next. So what are the next steps? What are you going to be talking about at your next meeting, hopefully? And then summarize it all by going back to that aim slide and showing, like, filling in what you've accomplished for what aim and what's next for each aim. So bring it all kind of back to those aims, and then bring it all the way back to that bigger picture. And so speaking of the bigger picture, why these meetings in the first place? So what is their purpose? I mentioned a little bit, but that's just my perspective. And so I wanted to get the perspective of a pro. And so I asked Dr. Alexandra Newton, who is a professor at UC San Diego and is also the president of the IUBMB, what she feels as a committee member is the purpose of the meeting, because she's been in a lot of these committee meetings. I've only been on the side of the student, not of the examiner or the committee member. And so I wanted to know, am I really thinking about things the right way? And how does she think about things? So she says that the purpose is really twofold. The first is to make sure that the student is on track for a timely completion of their PhD. And the second is to provide ideas and advice in the project to still help the student have an awesome thesis. And so here we have like both of these. They're to make sure like the student is on track and to help them be on track. And so this goes back to the idea that at this point their role really is or at least it should be, as a supporter for you and as someone who is really invested in you and your potential to get to the finish line. And now they're just trying to help make sure that you do. So I also asked her what they're looking for. She said that it's really important to know how your project fits into the big picture, which is also something that I think is really, really important and stress. So do you understand your project from the big picture perspective all the way down to the details of how you're tackling the problem? You kind of like get really, really nitty-gritty detail level when you're doing your research. But you have to remember that research is just part of a bigger scientific puzzle. And so you need to begin your talk by introducing that big picture and contextualizing where your research fits in. Not only does this show that you know the field, but it also shows that you know why you're doing what you're doing and where your research fits into that broader picture. So it's not just that you can read a bunch of review papers or read a bunch of articles, but you actually are able to contextualize your work within it. And you want to show them that you're able to do this. And so in the beginning, you're going to start out with that big picture. And so it can be kind of weird when you're in these meetings because you're surrounded by experts and it's like, do I really need to explain some of this stuff? Like, especially when you've been researching it so long, it kind of becomes second nature to you, or you forget that a lot of people don't know these things, especially if like you have committee members from different fields. Some of them might be really expert in one area, but not another area of your project, and vice versa for other people. And so what you need to do is make sure that everybody on your committee is on the same page. Not only is this going to help everybody get on the same page so no one gets lost and everyone really understands what you're saying, if they have some misconceptions going in, or if something wasn't explained correctly, then they might get confused, or they might think that you're doing something that you're not doing, and then yeah, you have to kind of correct them, but which can be really, really awkward. But so it's better to make sure that everybody is on the same page from the beginning. And this is also going to show them that you really have that broader picture in mind. And so speaking of that broader picture, how your work is part of a broader field, you want to know not just the field, but also the gaps within that field. And so you want to point out what things are missing in the field and what gaps are there in knowledge or technology. And then can you explain why what you're doing is important? So how are you going to help fill in those missing pieces of the puzzle? And so this gets into the main part of the thesis committee meeting, which is going to be showing them your research. So remember, you're going to start with reminding them where you were last time, and now show them where you are now. So you're going to be going into experimental details, and you're going to have lots of figures explaining like some of your experiments. In those figures, you want to make sure that you're giving any sort of contextual details that are needed. So make sure that you walk them through your figures, tell them what they're showing, explain the notation if it's unclear. So sometimes you might have a little shorthand that you use in your own notes, but if you were then using that shorthand in your presentation, it wouldn't make sense to others. And so you want to make sure that you're really explaining all of these figures, and also that you're only putting figures up for things that you're talking about. So it's really important that you have a polished PowerPoint. Again, this is some guidance from Alexandra Newton. She says to pay attention to the detail in the presentation, make sure there aren't any typos, that your data is clearly labeled, and that you're only showing the data that you're talking about. So whatever is on your slide is a talking point. Try to have as little like text and stuff as possible on those slides. Feel free to have more slides so that there's more white space. Don't be afraid of that white space. Keep that white space, and use bullet points, and really just rely on those slides just so you have something that you can be looking at and you can be pointing to various data points and things like this. But you should be able to kind of just talk things through with those and really be explaining things rather than just reading off of a slide. It's also going to help them focus on the figures rather than trying to understand what all this little text is next to it. And you want to make sure that those texts are that the figures are nice and polished too. And so Alexandra Newton suggests having some nice graphics to illustrate your experimental setup. And I know a lot of people use BioRender for this. I use Adobe Illustrator. A free alternative is Inkscape. And so that'd be if you want to kind of make a more custom sort of graphics, but BioRender can be a really great tool for they have a bunch of like stock images type things for scientific experiments that you can use. Okay, so speaking of those experiments, you want to make sure that you know why you're doing what you're doing. And so Dr. Newton stresses that you need to be able to explain all the aspects of your experiments and the techniques that you're using. And can you think of alternative approaches or other ways to address the same problem? And so this is going to be a really, really important thing, that you're going to be able to explain why you chose the approach that you did. Know its strengths and limitations. Know strengths and limitations of various methods. And know that your committee members likely will each have different ideas and opinions for what the best experimental approaches are. And even what topics, like what directions you should be going in. And so you want to take these all in stride and tactfully. And in the case where they're suggesting an experimental method that you don't feel is like the best, I mean, like that you feel is has limitations compared to what you chose, you want to be able to defend what you chose. So you also want to be able to kind of like consider what they're saying, consider the experiments that they're proposing and what benefits that they might have, but also don't feel like you're getting drawn away from your path. And so if you think that your idea makes more sense and you have valid reasons for doing that, then you can explain those things. So maybe yes, say something like, yes, I thought about doing that experiment. However, it would have the limitation that blah 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 blah. Or yes, that's a great idea to try alongside what I'm doing, or yes, I'll try, or yes, I'll think it over. Various things like this. But basically, you need to make sure that as awkward as it is, as hard as it is, you kind of maintain control of that meeting and don't let them kind of take you too off course or get you too flustered. There are times when the committee members might kind of just be like talking amongst themselves and things like this. You want to try to keep as much control over the meeting as you can. If they're trying to if they start like diverging too far off course, or asking you about things that you know that you're going to cover in a couple slides, feel free to say like, I think in a minute this will make a lot more sense. If it doesn't, then ask me, then I will, then if you still have questions, please feel free to ask them. But I think that once I explain this other thing, this is going to make a lot more sense. And also it's okay too if you need to skip forward in your slides if they ask a question, as well as have backup slides to help provide extra details in case that they would ask a question. There are things that are going to be kind of harder for you to explain, and so you might not want to emphasize them as much in your committee meeting, but maybe you have backup slides in case they ask about those. And so if they start to kind of like try to take you too off track, you can kind of try to bring things back to where you want the meeting to be, and to steer things by how you lay out your slides so that you can really focus on the experiments that you find, the data that you find is the most valuable for them to see, both so that it shows that you're making progress, but also so that if there's things that you would like advice and suggestions for, you're able to get that data shown so that you can get their thoughts and opinions, and really make the most of this meeting. Everybody's there for you, and so you want to make sure that it's the best use of everybody's time. And so you want to try as much as you can to keep things under control in terms of how you would like the meeting to go. It can be really hard, but the more confidence you grow over time, the easier this is going to be. But also don't get too concerned if like you get off track because of questions they ask and things like this. This might take you away from the time that you thought it would take, and that's totally fine because they're the ones asking you lots of questions. And so you might plan out your presentation to be a certain length, and Dr. Newton suggests that you do a practice talk and kind of time things out ahead of time to be within the time that they suggest. But also know that you might not go like that. Likely you're going to get just lots and lots of questions, and so things might not go according to that plan. And so that's totally fine that things are taking longer. They might have you skip over some things, but don't feel like, oh my god, I'm going way too slow. because what you're doing is you're answering their questions, which is the most important part of your job at the thesis in the meeting, is to be able to answer all those questions and to be able to answer them really, really thoughtfully. Speaking of answering thoughtfully, it's okay to say you don't know. If you don't know something, don't make it up, especially if you're in a room of experts who might be able to know that what you're saying isn't correct. You could say things like, it's an interesting question. I don't know the answer, but I'll look it up and get back to you. Or that's an interesting idea. I'll think about it and get back to you. So let your committee member know that you don't have an answer, but that you will do your best to find an answer. So it's not that you're like blowing them off or something like this, but actually show curiosity in their question or in their idea and show that you will that you're going to take initiative and look up an answer. In addition to saying it's okay you don't know, I just want to add that it's also okay to take a minute to think things through. So you don't need to feel like you need to have this instantaneous answer. It's not like Jeopardy or something like this where the timing, where it's fastest to the buzzer. Instead, it's better to take a minute, think things over, think things through, and then answer. So you want to think ahead about the types of questions that you might get asked. And one thing that can help with this too is doing a practice talk. So if you can do a practice talk with your lab, that's really, really great. As well as just kind of thinking through what questions would you have if you were seeing this someone else giving a presentation like this, someone else showing the data like that. So after you show them the status of your current research, you also want to tell them what's next. At this point, it's not like they expect you to be totally done. This is a progress meeting. If you were totally done, they'd be giving you your doctorate right then and there, which they're not. Although if you are getting near the finish, they might give you like the green light to start writing your thesis. But with anything, there's always going to be more to do. And so you want to do what's next. What I suggest for doing is like, you can talk about what's next as you go for each of the different projects. So you might be talking about one experiment and then you could say, okay, well, the next thing I may try is this. But then at the end, you're going to have more of a broad wrap up in terms of what's next overall and what's next for each of those individual aims. So I like to put back the aim slide that you had in the beginning. And so in the beginning, you had, okay, these were my aims. And then you added bullet points. Okay, well, this is where I was last time. And then this is where I'm going to tell you about today. And so now you bring back that slide. Okay, so these were my aims. This is what I told you about today. This is what I've done. And now add another bullet point. Okay, well, this is what I'm doing next. Having all of this is going to show that not only are you making progress towards your PhD, the end of like your thesis, which is one of the main goals of this meeting, is to show that and for them to ensure that. But it's also showing that you kind of see where the direction of your project and you're staying on track in your project. Everything that you're doing is contributing to those aims that you proposed in the beginning, and that you are thinking about how your project progresses and should progress towards that final result that you're hoping for, or that final those answers that you're looking for. So everything you're doing, you want to show that you have this thought in mind where you're making sure that everything you're doing is going to be focused on and directional towards that end. And also, I know I'm saying a lot about like these aims, but it's okay if your aims change, and it's good to be flexible. And they totally understand that sometimes these aims are going to change. You might have one aim that's going to take up most of your time, and then another aim is going to be less important. And it might be that in one of the aims, you find something that takes you slightly off course, but there are things that you can do to actually still work on that and kind of change your aims a little. And this is totally okay. Just like talk with your people in the program or whatever, if this sort of situation is something that you run into. But don't feel that these aims are constricting. These aims should instead be guiding. And by showing that you like where your progress is along these aims. You're helping show that you know how these aims are guiding your work. And finally, you want to bring it back to the big picture, because really that's what matters. And you, as much as you might find that the super duper tiny little piece of this puzzle that you're working on is interesting and fun to work on, the reason why you're actually working on it, or at least the reason why the lab got funded to work on it, is because it's an important question to answer. And so you need to show why that's an important question to answer, why this is an important thing to study. Show that you know why this is. You can explain why this is and why they should care. And so you want to basically bring everything back to that big picture at the end, that same big picture that you started with at the beginning. But here you can kind of show, okay, well, I put in a little bit of this puzzle piece. And so here's how what I found so far is contributing to this bigger picture, not just how my project overall contributes. So you want to all the time be able to put your work, put your research, put your findings, put everything in the context of that bigger picture, and do so in a way that your audience can see this as well. So hope that helped you feel a little more confident or prepared going into your meeting. So remember to practice, 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 polish up those slides. Keep in mind the purpose of this meeting is to help guide you along your journey and help you come up with ideas and things like this. So it's not as scary as those that defense, or at least it shouldn't be. You should really, it all depends on kind of how prepared you are going into it, how confident you're able to feel as these meetings go on, as you get further in your project, especially when you're having meetings after having some great results. These can be really, really helpful and really just feel kind of like discussions among colleagues. There's obviously a big power differential, and sometimes that can get really, really awkward. And the dynamics are going to depend on who's on the meeting, but really you should kind of view it as something that should be really helpful for you, as long as you come in prepared. As for the actual process of this meeting, typically what happens is that before the meeting, at least where I was, you submit your written report ahead of time, and they should have all have read it ahead of time. And then when you come in, they actually let you in the room, they like talk amongst themselves about the kind of questions that they're planning to ask and this sort of thing. And then you have so they come in there with already like kind of points that they're hoping to get to, as well as you have points that you're hoping to get to. So you have to kind of make sure that you get to your points as well, which goes back to the idea of kind of staying in control of the meeting. But so you your meeting, and then basically they take you out of the room, and then they talk amongst themselves, and then they let you back in the room and tell you kind of what they thought, and then they write up a written report and things like this. But these progress meetings aren't like, there's no pass fail type of thing like there is with the qualifying exam or with your thesis defense. With these, it's more just like, do they seem like they're on track? And if they don't, then they should be helping you provide ways to kind of get back on track. Because remember, they're your friends in this process. They've invested in you. It might not always seem like it, but it's really, at this point, it's in their best interest to really help you. And hopefully they have that thought in mind and are really supportive. And I hope that your thesis committee meetings go well.